welcome to a special segment of Willis Weighs In. And as you can see, I'm not Ben Willis. I'm Jasper Smith, Executive Editor for Commentary here at Tax Notes. And I'm delighted today to be actually turning the tables around and interviewing the host of the show, Ben. Now, to get started, Ben and I have known each other professionally for over a decade now. We started together when he was just an up-and-coming practitioner at PwC, and I was just starting my career here at Tax Notes. At that time, we worked together so that Ben could start publishing a regular column, also known as Willis Weighs In. And then we stayed in regular contact. I'd see him at conferences. We'd have phone calls as he went to Treasury, then to the IRS, then to Senate Finance, and then back into private practice. So although he might look young, he's got a pretty varied and engrossing background professionally, if you will. So in early 2019, we were delighted to have a conversation and actually bring him in-house here at Tax Notes as one of our regular contributing editors. And I'm sure many of you are readers of his articles. So that brings us to where we are now. We're venturing into a regular video series. And what we're going to hear today is from Ben on what he hopes to bring to this new medium. So after all that, Ben, it's great to see you.
Jasper, it's fantastic to see you as well. Thank you so much for agreeing to lead this show today and interview me and ask me some questions. As you said, our careers did grow together. And so I started writing early on in my career for tax analysts, and you were there from the beginning. And so I really view me coming to tax analysts as part of that relationship, a large part of that decision. And so thank you again for everything.
Yes, of course. And actually, when you first talked to me about helping you to do this intro for your video series, I was delighted because I've told you this many times, but one thing that always comes across to me in our conversations and in your writing, but definitely when you and I are talking informally and you're explaining to me a concept that you're planning on writing on or some aspect of tax that you're researching, I really see the passion. And in fact, it gets me excited and I love listening even when I don't understand half the time. So what I want to start with and what I'd like you to explain to your audience is, where does that passion come from?
Well, that is an interesting question. I could start off with my professional career, which you've alluded to in the intro. I could go back to college and perhaps we'll get to that. I'll tell you a little bit about my childhood, because I believe that my passion largely stems from my childhood and how that carried on throughout college and into my professional career. And so I was adopted at 5 years old by my grandparents, and my grandmother got into a car accident when I was 10, and after a number of surgeries, I went into foster care at 12 years old. And I moved through the system through a number of cities, mostly Providence, Rhode Island, where I grew up. And I wound up getting my GED at 15 years old. And the reason for that is because there was no continuity in school and education. I didn't stay in one school for any long period of time. And so it was very difficult for them to place me in the proper category of students that I should be in. And so I got my GED, and then I started working full time. That was after my social worker petitioned the mayor to allow me to get my GED so young. And then by the time I got to the University of Rhode Island, my experience from my peers was so different that it just led, I think, to a completely different experience. And I think that has to do with the fact that most of the people at the University of Rhode Island were used to that situation, attending classes, going to school, handing in papers, reading books. Personally, I hadn't read a book, a full book anyway. The last time was in the 6th grade before my first year in college. And that was a stark contrast with a lot of my peers at that time. And so what I realized is for them, it was independence. They were gaining their independence when going to college. For me, I had been living in my own apartment since 15 years old, and I was there for a reason. It was business to me. I wanted to get something that no one in my family or my friends had been able to get, which was higher education. I didn't know anybody who went to college, and so I took it incredibly seriously, and I fell in love with it. I studied some amazing subjects, and I continue to believe that I pursue learning with that same veracity that I did back then, which is based on my love and appreciation for education.
Yeah, and I've always been fascinated to hear about your unconventional route, if you will, to the through the educational experience, and of course into the tax world. So, as of there, you're now in college, you're in law school, you've decided you're going to pursue tax. Where does it go from there?
That's a good question. So I'm at the University of Rhode Island, and I jump into economics. We're required, everybody's required to take an economics class, and my professor pursued me after a class. I was one of 500 students in this giant classroom who spoke out, I think, 3 times on the first class. I think I was the only one who spoke out at all. And he asked me, if I had a background in it, and I calmly, humbly said no. I didn't want to give away my background. At that point, I wasn't very confident in my non-traditional educational experience growing up, and so he suggested that I continue to pursue it and come up to him with any questions, and so I did, and I fell in love with economics and political science, which I studied both for my undergraduate bachelor's degree at the University of Rhode Island, and I just remember falling in love with Socrates and Plato and people who studied the art of learning and education for their entire lives, who created a science around it. And both of these studies are about are social studies, and they're about human behavior. And economics is largely the consumption of goods and supply and demand, and concepts that we're familiar with from school. And politics is really the expression of that through our elected officials. And as a democracy, we have our politicians represent us, and tax just flows from both of those topics so naturally, because as we're seeing now with the COVID crisis and the CARES Act, and the HEROES Act that's being discussed on the Hill right now for potential enactment, and being debated in the Senate. I mean, the decisions that we make and the costs that we choose to incur as a government and as a whole represents our decision, our collective decisions, as to what is best for our country and our economy. And that includes general welfare, education, health, obviously, and economics really is a huge factor in determining these tax decisions, which is why all of the legislation receives scores, estimates based on how much it's expected to cost and how much revenue is expected to be generated by tax provisions. And that's really my early inclination to fall for tax based on what I studied in my undergraduate.
Sure, that makes complete sense. And of course, again, hearing you talk about it and hearing the way that you view tax, I would argue you're exactly where you should be in our organization. But some might say, well, Ben actually had a very successful career. He was doing well in practice, had some government experience. What led you to kind of change paths a little bit, at least for now, and take on this new role as a writer?
Tough question. Okay, wasn't going to call that one good, but no, I actually think it's good for me. I'm thrilled to be here. I've been so excited since I joined. So my career started as a practitioner. I left Boston University's LLM program and came straight to DC in 2008. I've been practicing and doing tax for 12 years now, and I I spent the majority of my career as a practitioner, and based on my background and my philosophy about education and fairness and transparency, and just my approach to tax, I try to bring fairness and representation to all taxpayers. And so I believe that everybody is entitled to the benefits provided in the tax code, regardless of how big or small they are. And so I make sure to advocate that, and have continued to since I began writing for you guys in 2010, ever since then. And so I veered off, as you mentioned, into Treasury and the IRS and Senate Finance Committee for 4 years. And in 2017, I went over to the Hill to help out with some of the legislation that was being drafted, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, ultimately. And I went over from there to BDO as a partner in their corporate tax group. And I loved the opportunity of the job. It presented fantastic challenges in representing clients, which is something that I always was passionate about. And I hope that comes out not only in my writing, but on these video sessions that we're going to be having going forward, especially as I interview other guests and have people on and I'm advocating for certain ideas. I think, as you mentioned earlier, I can get pretty passionate about some of these topics. And so hopefully that's clear to my listeners. And right around that time, my son was born. So July of 2017, a month before I left the Hill at the Senate Finance Committee, my son was born, and that had a big impact on me. I started off, at leaving government and re-becoming a practitioner, and I believe I pursued that with the same passion that I historically had. But given the amount of travel that required representing clients, speaking, it was difficult with a infant at home. And so I decided that it was time for some reprioritization. And so I spent a year and a few months at BDO, had a fantastic experience. But over the past year and a half, I have been able to spend more time with my son, who's now 2, and my wife. And it has been a fantastic experience and journey. And I'm just so thankful that I've been able to do both over the course of my career.
Yeah, wonderful. And so are we. And what anybody who knows you knows, Ben, the tougher the question, the better your answer. So I'm glad I asked you a tough one there. We appreciate that background. And you didn't give me enough credit as a recruiter, though. You know, I talked you into coming over here.
I would not be here today if it was not for Jasper Smith. And since I'm sure that might be taken into account for a variety of reasons, I just want to make sure credit is paid.
So, and one thing, because we talked about this for a year and a half, you've had a lot of success as a writer before you came on for us regularly. And of course, now that you're doing your regular column and your articles are doing well, people are responding. And I think that you've hit a nice stride there. So why are you choosing now to take on this new platform and start a video series?
It's really designed to broaden the scope of listeners that I have reached to. And so, in mentioning my story earlier and my roots, I think transparency and fairness was a big part of that, and making sure that as many taxpayers as possible have access to cutting edge information that they may not otherwise have. And so many folks are able to read my lengthy technical discussions that are often in my articles. I think the video just brings a whole new element to the discussion. It really gives you a good flavor for someone who you're listening to and speaking with, and you can get to understand a little bit more of what's going on behind the wheels when they're churning out this analysis and giving you their tax views and opinions. And so I'm hoping that this will do exactly that, which is to give my current readers a little bit more of a flavor and understanding of me and what goes into, the process of my work. but also expand the audience to more folks who can listen in while they're driving or while they're looking at their computers and want to hear some interesting topics. And I hope that I'll be able to do that through fantastic controversial discussions that I'm going to be weighing in on over the course of the next many years, I hope.
Yeah, we hope as well. And I just wanted to add, there's a lot of podcasts out there right now and video series, several on tax for listeners to choose from. So what do you think will be particularly unique about yours? If you want to talk about some topics, we're happy to hear it.
Sure. So I've never been afraid to weigh in on controversial topics. I think people appreciate that about my writing. And it all depends on which piece they're reading. And so now that I've been writing for about a year and a half now, I think people have really begun to appreciate my style. I remember first starting off and hearing, well, it seems to be you're taking one side of a position or another side of a position and not representing both sides. And more often than not, I would ask that person, well, if you Google the other side or do some research, how many arguments do you think there are for the contrary position? And usually the answer is many. I usually like to represent the side that's not receiving the attention that it deserves. And so perhaps that can be tied back into my youth and just what drives me generally, but making sure that there is transparency, I think, is very critical to this tax system as a whole. And so I like to be that voice that's willing to step on the scales and try to tip them and make people see a different side of things. And so that naturally means that there's going to be controversy with respect to the topics I discuss, seeing that other people clearly have a different view, whether it be Treasury and the IRS with respect to regulations they think they have the authority to promulgate, or with respect to positions that taxpayers are taking, or decisions that courts or even law that's being made on the Hill. And so I think that'll be a theme that'll follow on the show as it has in my articles, is that I'll continue to try to cover all sides of the spectrum, but with an emphasis on issues that I think are just not receiving the attention they deserve. So hopefully, we've got an election coming up. We have a lot of proposals with respect to tax on the table. We have a number of regulations that need to be finalized in the near term, and I expect that there will be a lot of topics that I will be discussing that are controversial over the upcoming episodes.
And what's interesting about everything you said there is one thing I'm privy to that probably a lot of people are, is really just the immense amount of research and preparation that you put into preparing or getting ready to write each one of your articles. And the thing that always fascinates me is your attention to the details that other people might overlook. You say, Jasper, no, it's this small nuanced point. This is what I'm trying to get at. So can you give maybe some of our listeners a glimpse into how you prepare and even maybe what in your background contributes to that level of preparation?
Sure. I'll share a brief story with you about a conversation I had with the dean of Boston University's LLM program, the graduate tax program. We had our first discussion in my junior year as an undergraduate at the University of Rhode Island. I sat down with him. I scheduled this meeting. I gave pretty much no advance notice as to what the topic of the meeting was. He, of course, asked me, this is Dean Haddad, Ernest Haddad, what I was there for. And I said I'd like his advice on where I should go to law school. And he was shocked to hear that question. He's like, you mean not at Boston University? I said, no, I can't go to Boston University. I work full time at a law firm. At the time, I was actually working for a bankruptcy firm. But once I started law school, I dove into trust and estates and and creditor rights there as well. And so during that discussion, I said, there's really only two programs that I can go to, which is Suffolk and New England School of Law. And he told me that New England School of Law had a tax specialization and was part of the tax moot court competition, which met in Florida on an annual basis and argued before tax court judges. And I competed in that competition 2 years, and it was an incredible experience. But he pointed me to New England School of Law because he knew I was so interested in tax, and I would be working full time and had to go to school at night. But he was shocked that he was sitting with an undergraduate who was asking him, I know where I want to go for my LLM program. Please tell me how to get there. And he asked me, well, what brought you to me? I mean, most people come in their third year of law school to have this discussion. You're coming in your third year of undergraduate. And I told him I like to plan. I like to think ahead. I like to, really give consideration to all the options as far as in advance as possible. And so I think he appreciated my passion for education then. And so he, complimented me on the fact that I seemed well researched at that time, particularly for somebody who dove in so early on into the topic. And I had discussions with a number of professors at the University of Rhode Island, economics, poli-sci. I did a lot of research at the time, but that's just a small story to give you a glimpse as to how much preparation I do, usually before taking on some sort of an endeavor like writing an article. And so I realized that's a little bit different, and an article may seem smaller, but at the same time, I often find, particularly in tax, that the devil is in the details, and you really have to focus not only on the rules that are in front of you and the complex web that the code weaves, but you also have to be able to step back and look at the big picture as well. And that's where I think that my professional background is so helpful, in the fact that I represented for taxpayers before the IRS on audit, as well as help draft the rules in the IRS, on the Hill, through Senate Finance Committee, and in Treasury. And so I think that broad experience, as well as a historic passion for tax stemming all the way back to undergrad, really gives me the same type of drive that I try to continue to apply with every article that I put forth. And it's pretty methodical, and I like to give it a lot of advanced thought. So I hope that answers your question.
No, absolutely. And I think, again, I have confidence you'll put forth, and I know listeners look forward to you putting forth that same level of effort in the video series. One thing that came across there is you're always trying to look ahead and kind of see the angles as much as you can. I know you're never satisfied, even with your own answer, sometimes to the chagrin of my editorial staff, but I think it ends up in a well-rounded and complete article. And certainly, Ben, we've covered a lot, and we certainly look forward to hearing a lot more topics. But before I let you go, I do have one question. Of course, I know the answer to, but I'm sure people have wondered over the years. Why the title Willis Weighs In?
Oh boy, I was able to dig this mug out. It says, "Warning: Do not feed the ogres." And this mug was actually given to me by some friends of mine at PwC, and the story behind that mug is the answer to your question, which is, when I first arrived to DC 12 years ago, I weighed 295 pounds, and I had spent the prior 10 years powerlifting. And so I had, slowly accumulated this massive gym through Craigslist purchases, which used to be popular back in the day. And I was able, to get, all these dumbbells and everything I needed to really embark on that. And I dedicated a good portion of my life to powerlifting, but I decided that when I hit 30, I was going to lean up for health purposes. And it was about 6 months after my 30th birthday that I decided that Willis Weighs In would be an ideal column name. And it has really two meanings. So one is that literal meaning, which is that I am planning to continually weigh in to make sure that I'm achieving my goals. And in fact, I was able to drop 70 pounds, mostly through cardio and diet and strength training as opposed to powerlifting. But also, I named it Willis Weighs In because I wanted and knew I knew that because my topics were going to be controversial, that I was going to have to take weighing in on topics extremely seriously. And in order to tip the scales and shed light and leave an impression, a heavy impression, hopefully, on those folks who are, reading the column. And so that's the reason for Willis Weighs In, the name.
So when we look behind you and we see those treatises, are those just so you can get a little exercise in your office, maybe while you're sitting there? Or?
These are actually just posters. No, I actually use these books quite a bit. I do most of my research online, and then when I find a case, a revenue ruling that I'm interested in, I grab an IRB and open it up and do my reading, and it helps with memorization, writing notes in it and whatnot. But I appreciate the joke. Certainly moving the boxes in here and the books in here were part of my lifting routine. I counted that as a workout day for sure. But otherwise, no, I don't use them too often for that purpose. I have a gym downstairs where I still have my 100-pound plates and dumbbells and all that good stuff from my powerlifting days. I will say that my bench press went from 405 for 5 to 10 times to about 225 pounds. But of course, my pace has picked up a lot, and I do a lot more repetitions and whatnot. But yeah, I appreciate the acknowledgement of my geeky library.
And for those that are interested, we'll be giving Ben's workout routine in a later episode. Ben, thank you so much. I know we talk a lot, but I really appreciate you having me on the episode to talk with you today, for giving us that fascinating peek behind the curtain, really. It sounds like we have a lot to look forward to. I'm sure our audience is looking forward to you weighing in on so many topics in the coming months and years.
Jasper, thank you very much again for having me. I'm really excited about the upcoming episodes, and it's just fantastic to work with you again after we've been doing it for so long.
If you want to reach out to Ben directly, you can find him.
If folks want to email me, they can do so directly at ben.willis@taxanalyst.org, or they can head to Twitter and reach me at Willis Weighs In.
And of course, you can find all of Ben's articles, blogs, etc. at taxnotes.com.
Willis Weighs In.